Okay, let's start. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this month's ICOPS meeting, which is the last one of the year. My name is Javier Ruiz Perez from Pompeu Fabra University, and I'll be your host today. I'm happy to introduce our main speaker, Dr. Ethel Allué, a researcher at the Catalan Institute of Human Palaeoecology and Social Evolution, and an associate lecturer at the Universitat Rovira i Virgili and the Universitat Oberta de Catalunya. Dr. Allué has extensive experience in anthropological research, having worked for decades across Eurasia on the study of fuel as an energy source, vegetation cover dynamics, and charcoal taphonomy. Today, together with some of her collaborators, Xavier Sopesens and Andrés Robledo, they will present Unlocking the Archive, Digital Challenges in 30 Years of Anthracological Research. This talk will explore their latest project focused on recovering legacy charcoal datasets and making them openly accessible. If you have questions during the talk, please leave them in the chat, and I'm sure they will address them at the end of the talk. Well, thank you and welcome.
Thank you very much, Javier. Thank you for having us here. We're very lucky, in fact, to be here. We are sharing with you these different examples of open science that we are working in, not only the three persons that we are presenting, but all these other co-authors that are also participating in this presentation. So we are going to talk about the open science procedure at our institution. We are going to explain this example related to commercial archaeology and the history of anthracology mainly in Catalonia. And then we are going to present an experimental data that have also been shared in open science. I'm going to let Xavier Sopesens to speak first. No, there's this other, sorry. Well, at IPES, we work in different disciplines on archaeobotany, and we produce a vast amount of data, and these include taxonomy lists, taphonomy studies with all the material characterization. We also apply dendroanthropology, and we provide all these growth ring measurements. We work also with micro archaeobotany remains, producing records on wildfire records or pollen records and others. We also carry a lot of work on experimentation, producing a lot of numeric data and protocols. And finally, also we produce a lot of data related to the images that are related to all these studies. And now, yes, I leave the
Okay. I will work about the policies and the practice here in the open science, in IPES about open science. In the last 4 or 5 years, we have been working on giving support to the researchers about in all the cycle of data of any project. So in that year, we have published our open science policy. Right now, it's just in Catalan, but we have to publish also in Spanish and in English. And just to acknowledge all the process we support we support writing the DMPs commonly at the 6 first months of every project. Also, we give support on developing databases and interfaces to analyze data, and also, and in this specific case, to publish datasets in different repositories. Just for the record, this is an unrelated example, but for example, we have here a common example of an Excel file with, if I don't remember, but it was 250 columns about specimens and sites, and we converted that into this kind of interfaces with a map and sites and time periods, and you can check what kind of genres you can find in every site. That's a common example of what we do here. Okay, on our policies, we are really interested in that the data that it's made here have fits the needs of the public. So we really encourage our researchers to publish the data in specific repositories, for example, in Neutoma or other of specific repositories. We also have Cora RGR. It's supported by a consortium of universities of Catalonia. And well, we give support here with metadata and curation of the resources. And if there will not be any of these resources, we recommend to publish on Zenodo. Just for to check what kind of numbers we manage. In that year, in this year, we published 89 datasets. We exploded in demand. We have 9 in draft, and just 40 of them came from the same project. So right now we have projects that really need that kind of repositories. The 64 repository reports that we publish on about anthropology have been published in the last 3 years, and also means for us a lot of the data sets that we published. And also we have been working not just on published ongoing project data, but also on published data that have not been prepared for being published in open science, because there were no open science idea in the moment that this data were made. So we have been working on publish that data, on curate it, and generate the metadata that they need. And what kind of information we need, what kind of metadata we generate. This is just like a common paper, I think. Okay, yeah. We have the authors and the title, the description of the data set, the keywords, and the Creative Commons to check what we can do with the information we find here. And at your right, you have how we sort the information inside every data set. Also, it's important for us that Cora have some specifications that are important for us. Sorry for the redundancy. For example, in the app left, we have GBIF specific metadata about what specimen we are talking about in this dataset. We can go with that link to GBIF, to the backbone GBIF information. Obviously, we are a center related with a lot of sites, and it's important for us the geospatial information about the every site. And in the top right, we have keywords, but not just keywords, but also they are related with some specific controlled vocabularies. Here we have an example of Bronze Age that starts in different moments in different places. So if you click in that specific example, you will go to the definition and the timestamp of that Bronze Age we are talking about in this dataset. And also, well, a lot of that archive datasets we publish were made in Catalan. So we decided in the mandatory for us README TXT file to specify what the columns of every tabular file means. In that case, they were made in Catalan, and we have a column called Structura, and we say, okay, but in English, that means bit number. And also here you have in keywords that anthropology are related to controlled vocabulary called ArchaeoIndex. ArchaeoIndex is a thesaurus we already generate for our needs. It was made 3 or 4 years ago, I don't remember well, with the initially with 2,000 words that come from our publications, our papers, and we sort them, and we were giving some kind of extra information. For example, here in anthropology, we say what is the preferred label in every language of that specific word, and a little definition to give support on the metadata we were putting on every data set. And with that, my part is done.
Thank you. So he did all this effort to share this data set that I'm going to try to brief now. And this work that we did with this data set was presented to the Anthracology meeting in 2023 and has been recently published in the Journal of Archaeological Science reports. So anthropology emerged at the 80s, and at the time, most of the researchers were, or some of the researchers working on anthropology were trained in Montpellier, and we have the Montpellier School, and trained different female, mostly female, like Cristina Madal, Oliva Rodriguez, and some others, and Paloma Ozquiano, working in different areas in Spain. And in Catalonia was Maite Ros, the first that started working on anthropology in the 80s. After that, Raquel Piqué and myself started working in the 19s, Itxaso Euba in the 2000. And then there has been, in the last decade, an important increase. We're very happy to have this increase of people working on theses and on research in different sites in Catalonia. If you're interested in reading these early stages of anthropology, it's very interesting to read this book on autobiographies on anthropologists from the early multidisciplinary studies in Spain. So at the same time as the development on anthropology, in Spain emerged also a number of companies that started because of the beginning of renewing buildings, roads, subways in the different cities, started archaeology companies that were interested in these multidisciplinary studies. Not all at the time, not all the samplings were very accurate, but at the laboratory from Raquel Piqué and our laboratory, we started working for commercial anthropology. And during this time, between 1996 and 2008, we studied 64 sites. And you can see here in the graph that there were like years with a peak of studies and then a decrease. And then because of the crack of 2008, this was stopped because most of the companies had to close, and they stopped building and doing commercial archaeology. From these 64 sites, of these 64 studies, only 13 data sets were published. And from there, most of them, they are anthropology studies. At the time, you can see here at the image, Itxaso Euba and myself, we were the ones that did all these analyses, and we wrote these reports that were very descriptive about it was a taxonomic list. Sometimes it was just a single fragment. So we wrote these reports and we handed to the company, and sometimes just occasionally they were published. And you can see the good handwriting of Itxaso and mine, and we kept these documents, and we have the spreadsheets, and then sometimes some good images, even if it's this optical microscope, because we had this good video camera that provide good images. So the reports had the taxonomic list, a brief description of the results, and they were kept in different type of repositories, like local repositories and computers. And in fact, some of them, when we did this process of publishing or sharing this data, there are some of them that I haven't been able to recover, or I could recover the taxa list because I still had the handwriting, but I didn't have a copy, just a paper copy of the report. So we had a little bit struggling collecting all these data sets. So because commercial archaeology was concentrated around the big cities, because it was where the roads were built and the subways and all these things. So you can see here in the map the distribution of these sites concentrated around the area of Barcelona and the area of Madrid. And the chronologies goes from the Pleistocene to modern ages. I'm going to go through these different periods. You can see down in green are the ones that were published, and some of them because they came from universities and not exactly from commercial archaeology. So for late prehistory, we have very little data sets, and usually you can see here in the graph that the relation between the number of fragments and the number of taxa is usually very low, because sampling was not always systematic. So sometimes we got just a few charcoal, but we thought was important to have at least a list of taxa. So for late prehistory, we have little evidence, but the results that we can provide, this taxonomic list, are very similar or can relate to other studies from sites that have systematic samples. And we can see in this data set that in the Neolithic, we have more recurrency or more abundance of deciduous oaks, whereas in the Chalcolithic and Bronze Age, we have more evergreen oaks and some Pinus sylvestris type in some sites where there's evidence of building material. For the Iron Age and the Iberian culture, also the concentration of sites is even between the area of Barcelona and Madrid, and we have a few that they were published, and one of them, El Sestinclés, was part of a PhD on the area of Lleida, and here also we can provide a data set with low number of charcoal, but with interesting taxonomic records with difference between the area of the Northeast and Central Iberia that can maybe in the future be used to make more deeper studies, now that it's shared in the CODA. For the Roman period, it's interesting because there are not many studies on this period. Not anthropology is very focused on prehistory, and these periods are less studied. And also we have sites with very little charcoal remains, but we have this evidence related to the use of wood or environmental information, providing different taxonomic evidence. And finally, also for the Middle and Modern Ages, there's also this concentration in the area of Barcelona and Madrid, with some sites that they have reliable data set, which are very interesting. One of them is El Mercat del Born, that has been also recovered in a PhD by Sabrina Bianco, and now that has increased this data set. And also another interesting site, Antigua Audiencia, which is an oven and provides really interesting data on fuel management in these periods. Regarding other data sets, we have been able also to share some charcoal and pollen analysis. There's this couple of examples by the palynologists in our team. And as I mentioned, the work by Sabrina Bianco, which is a PhD recovering information of our previous data set, but also sharing what she's producing in her PhD. And now I'm going to leave Andrés to explain the last part of our presentation.
Yes, so hello everyone. So for this part, we wanted to show another part of these strategies of open access information that we're dealing here at IPES in the project. This is talking about an experimental program that we developed with Ethel Allué and the team here at IPES. And from the start of developing this project and the protocols of the experiment, we planned to, with the data management plan, as Javier just said, we managed to involve that these informations have to be prepared to be uploaded in repositories and to be in open access, because we understand that it was useful for us and for other researchers to have this experimental information. So basically, we started our main project of this experimental is understanding about fuel use and fire management in the past, regarding not only the firewood that is previously gathered and the remains selected, but also stop. Let's see if we're sharing.
Give me a second.
Okay. No, es abajo. ¿Está? ¿Pongo? Probemos.
Did you stop seeing the presentation? No.
Okay.
This is okay. It is okay now. Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
It's working now, yes.
Okay, perfect. So what we wanted to understand is a little bit about when people were using the fire in the past, which were the consequence and the benefits of the use of fire. So we started to develop a project regarding different archaeological contexts from where we know the anthropological information, such as Ethel told you before. And we developed this experiment in different locations, such as Palaeolithic hut that we built in. Can you press the next one? Okay. So for this experiment, we gathered a lot of information, not only from firewood related or remains related, but also from devices that there was a lot of data about temperature, measurement of air quality, light emission, and different set of things, 3D image of the hut and the huts that we were making. So there's a high variability of sources from where we have data that we wanted to share. So what we did during the first stages of this experiment, when we published also this information, part of the experiment, and we put the protocols in open access in the Core repository, and part of the information that is, all the information that is published in this article was also uploaded in Core repository as a way to not only have the protocol so people can use it and adapt it to their future experiment or interested, but also the data regarding this different experiment, data related that can be in a way that is information that could be replicable and could be comparative and it's in access for everyone.
And this is all from our side. We thank you very much for this invitation, and we invite you to, if you have questions on our presentation.
Thanks to you for joining us today. Very lovely work. I have some questions, but first I would like to ask the chat, the people here, if they have any question or something they want to talk about. Just feel free to unmute yourselves. Okay, we have somebody, Emma.
Hello. Thanks very much for your talk. I just had a question about because at the beginning, I think it was Javier, your first speaker, was talking about if I got this correct, helping researchers to deposit their data into repositories. Is that correct? Um, I I just wanted to know what sort of help do researchers need in your discipline to actually deposit their data? Like what is their knowledge of using and their experience of using repositories before they interact with you? Because this is definitely something we are trying to understand within the phytolith community is like who can do it, who can't do it, how much training do they need, how much help do they need. So it would be really interesting to understand from your discipline those issues as well.
Okay, complex one. In my experience, there are a lot of differences between what people think that open science is and what they want to do. For example, we have people, when I arrived here, that already have published in Neotoma, and they have ways more experience than me, and they helped me to use all these repositories. But also we have people that never have published, and they already have been really happy to be able to publish. Sorry. Yeah. Okay. So the range of help that they need it's huge, too different between people. But for example, in Cora, for how it is made, it's a Dataverse software, so it's free to use. How it is made, it says that there have always to be a curator that check all the datasets before to be published. So until this last year, where we had a lot of datasets, what we made here, we are like 100 researchers. So we have been able to say, okay, let's sit together and check what do you need. What do you want to what do you want to publish, or what are your needs? So it was so personal, and it was a lot of work to do. But in the last year, there were people that have been able to do it alone. So more specifically, what we do is, okay, let's check what you have, and let's search for the better place where this could be, where could be more useful for people, more than accomplish fair principles or accomplish legal requirements. First of all, how it could be more useful for the rest of the community. And when we find that place, okay, let's fill all the metadata the way that it's more easy to be searched. How for example, Google robots can find it easily. And when we arrive at that point, we decide the CCPY or the license, and also the files that you want to publish. Maybe it's code files, or maybe it's just tabular data. It depends on a lot of what do you want to publish, or if it is related with a paper. I don't know if it answered, but it's
It does. It does. It sounds like the researchers kind of get like one-to-one help. Is that right? So they get very personalized help each time. Okay. And is that because you Javier, you are a dedicated person working on the repositories, is it? So it's basically like a service that your organization provides. Okay. That's really lucky for you to have that. Because I would think that's one of the problems that I think a lot of researchers have, is that they don't know where to go for the help. Like their departments don't have help, so they don't really know where to start. So yeah, that's amazing that you have that resource. Yeah, great.
Yeah, in fact it is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, in
Brilliant.
fact, it's our, no, we should say that. In fact, we are very happy to have,
Yeah.
because then we get not only someone that helps, but also the education, the culture of open science. And because sometimes, like Andrés, he came to IPES for a couple of years. He came already with this culture because he was working in open science environment and the previous project, but the ones that we've been here all the time, we maybe, until we started this, we didn't have the culture and the experience and the knowledge of this specific vocabulary. And then it's good to have someone, like, to use the money to have someone working on that. And then, like, not only like a technical support, but then involve him in this presentation or in this publication, no? That we know it's like goes both ways.
Yeah. For example, in that way, the thesaurus we designed it, we get all the words, and okay, we made it, we coded it, we made the software, but it was not. We would not be able to do that without combining technical knowledge and the specific science knowledge of every one of these disciplines.
Any other questions from the audience? No? Well, I have a question for you, especially for Ethel. I think it's really fascinating the way you recover data sets and then you kind of reuse them. And you showed some plots by classifying data from different time periods, right? And I wanted to ask you, was it easy to reuse the data? Because, for example, something we find especially in phytolith studies, is that people, they call the same morphotypes using different nomenclatures. And I don't know if in charcoal research that's common, or if you were only using charcoal for which you have reliable taxonomic definitions, or
well,
how was the process?
These 64 sites that we studied, we use the traditional categories that are used in anthracology, that sometimes you get to the genus, sometimes the family, and sometimes the species. So the spreadsheets, what they have is the taxa that we have identified. So maybe, and when I was opening these files that I produced, like in the 1996, that I had less experience, I think they are reliable. Yeah, I think I can trust this taxonomic list, because I think about myself that I'm really cautious, but in the identification, I mean, with less experience. But yes, now that they are like open, I think they can be used and they are reliable, but they are not types, but they are taxonomic lists. So I think now this information can be reused by someone like working Roman periods, and that maybe they find an interest. So yeah, I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The material is still here, so if someone like thinks, well, this cannot be, no, someone that wants to reuse this data and think they cannot trust, the material is still somewhere and can be reanalyzed. So this is something that like happens with other type of materials. I think for charcoal, it's easier than phytoliths, that you need the sediment and to make a preparation and go over. Here you always have, if you say, well, I'm going to use this because I trust this author, I'm going to reuse this data, but I also can ask for the material and revise, actually revise. And this, I think, with phytoliths is not that easy.
but I think that's one of the things within archaeobotany and archaeology in general. But there has to be like some ways that we can reuse these things from done before, that we're not thinking sometimes that, okay, this is going to be in an open repository. Before they were not thinking that, but we have to deal with this information and think that if it also means to publish in a different way, but it also means to put it in the game that we can, okay, work with this information. And if we are not sure about, or if we want to do more analysis, okay, well, now we can find the way to, but we will make analysis because we know that it's open and the data is there. If we don't publish these things, this will still be in a box. So I don't know, maybe in fact, this is another problematic, I know that, but it's also this thing that, okay, that eventually you will have to publish or present something, because if not, it will be in a box forever.
All right, thank you. So Sigrid has a question, please go ahead.
I was just wondering how, obviously you've sort of centered your data repositories around Catalonia. Are there any plans to linking it with other repositories? So actually, in a way, at some point, there's a worldwide repository where perhaps there's that one big overarching, and then it can link into different regions of the world.
Yeah, in fact, this data set is not a single spreadsheet. So if you want to use, it's a lot of work because you have to download it. It's not like the Neotoma that you send the information and there's a map and there's a taxonomic list, and it's easier here. Each one of the reports, it's uploaded as a single report, so to work on this data, you need to have more information. We don't have plans to do that, but maybe if we rework this data and do a consistent, like, single data set for Roman period, and then we upload it to some other, like, more international repository, this, I think it might be more useful. Now it's useful for example, I know someone that is working on Roman periods in Catalonia, working on her PhD. She's gonna go there and download this and do the work. But yeah, maybe this is an idea, but we are not thinking, well maybe he has.
Yeah, not for this specific case, because like Ethel said, we publish the report and also the tabular data, and you have to enter the data set and enter the tabular data to check the material. But we have another project where we uploaded 3D models of every bone of different species. When the example I said before about the Bustaurus, when we said, okay, there is the JBIF identifier, and right now we can go from our repository to JBIF, but from JBIF we cannot go to Cora. So we are working on giving that interoperable accessibility, and we have to wait, I think, because well, we are a small center, and I know for sure that there are European projects, really big projects where they are working on this interoperability, and we have to wait because I know that Dataverse is openly used. It's so spread, and it will be used for a lot of centers. So in some moment, these repositories will all be interrelated, but I think that we have to wait. And for now, we can think on relate with really big meta repositories as JB.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, Emma.
I have many questions, don't worry. So my other question is about different types of data. So because you did talk about you've got archaeological data, you talked about having like commercial data compared to like university type data, research data, also the experimental data as well. I have had problems in the past with implementing what I want in terms of open science working commercially, because I've been sort of in the UK, often I'm not actually the data owner when I do commercial work. So I wanted to understand, have you come across like similar barriers to sort of applying open science practices to different types of data?
Well, in this particular data set, these 64 sites, most of the companies, and one of the main companies that we were paid to do this doesn't exist anymore. And in fact, when we were working on this, we talked about this aspect that they're going to claim, but all the charcoal are still here with us, so they didn't claim that. And the other big company that we have most of the data set, they also have an editorial, they publish all the results. So we haven't like really discussed this, but I don't think they could claim, but most of them they have disappeared, this company. And after that, we haven't been in this situation.
That sounds good, because it's not a good situation to be in.
Important, we need to think about. So,
yeah,
good question.
So I have another question for you guys. So I was thinking, you've been talking about how to recover data, legacy data, and how to kind of reuse it. So my question now is, do you have any advice for people who is working with anthropological data on how they should publish their data in a way that it's reusable in the future? Like, what would be the main aspect that you think it's relevant? So for example, for us in phytolith studies, we think that it's very useful to describe morphotypes and also define the kind of nomenclature you're using, but also, for example, it's essential to provide images. So I don't know, what's your opinion on this?
I think we are still, the researchers, we are still in the phase that we are doing this because we know this is good and we have to do it, and we do this, but I don't think like in the different PhDs like Sabrina's, so she's uploading everything because, but I think it's more thinking about we are doing this than the next step that someone is going to use it, or myself, I'm going to go somewhere, I'm gonna, in anthropology, I mean, because we still use, like in the rest of publication, that they are not open files, there are still the tables, and we have access to most of the data. So I think we are still in the early stages of this, and we don't, at least myself, like we have to, well, we are doing this, we are learning, but the next step of reusing by others, and we don't know how I don't know how many people will be interested in Sabrina's data set working on the Middle Ages in Barcelona. Anthracology, we're very like little community still regarding the use of data. And yeah, if you compare with phytoliths and you have the identification of the types, I think it's a little bit different. But yeah, maybe you can. Yeah,
I think one of the things, at least for me, it was like this for new projects. Well, from what we have done before, we have to like have this policy, like Ethel said. But for new project, it is important to start, even your project or your funding ask you or not. It is important to think about this. How are you going to manage this data? What are you going to do? With your plan of working? What are you going to produce of that, and what do you want to do with that? And it's a valid question, and it's going to change over time. He knows about it, but it's important because you can then see, okay, I want to this part of this research, I want this to be open access, for example. And you prepare in a way that is going to be thinking about ahead, and people are going to use it because it's going to be meaningful for some people. And other parts, maybe they're not so relevant in this interoperability than before, but it has meaning in preservation. So you are preserving because the formats are changing very quickly also. So it's another thing to take account. And basically, I think people are more afraid of what have you done before, are more afraid of the time that you're going to spend uploading all these things, like this idea of having a lot of work on this thing that is already done. But well, no, because we can reuse this thing and give it a new meaning. Maybe not today, maybe not in 10 years, but maybe in 50 years, charcoal from downtown Barcelona will be interesting to have this information. And we know that, sorry, one more thing. We know that publishing in articles is not enough because we have this idea of publishing and we put the tables and the taxonomic list or the morphotypes, and we trust in that the researchers are doing good their job and everything, but sometimes we want to have this other data like pictures, for example, or other type of description that is useful for further other analysis, not to discuss. So it's like good time.
Yeah. Well, if you have the joyful opportunity to write a DMP, you will know that there is a question that say for whose people you think that data could be useful, something like that. It's like, okay, how it could be useful, and I think the idea in that question it's like, okay, try to be wide-minded, open-minded about how many people can use your data, and try to go further. Like if you go further, it's like, okay, maybe you will publish more data than you were thinking in the first time, and the much data you publish, the more useful could be for more people. We were thinking, okay, maybe we are working on zooarchaeology, and somebody say, okay, but this could be useful for veterinary, and it's okay, yeah. And if you think like that, then you will go a little bit further. How much data you will publish and so on.
Okay, thank you. I guess this is the last chance to ask another question. Otherwise, we're going to leave it for today. No questions? Oh, I see a message in the chat. Should I read it out loud?
Yes, well, we agree with Stephanie because she's already done things with this idea.
And you see your Ethiopian collection.
But I think that is her example is interesting because while we are already a few people not talking about it, but trying to do something about it, trying to, I don't know, maybe next anthropological meeting we'll meet again and see, okay, how many people are more presenting this type of information in open access and what can we do with it. So I know that you're at ICOPS and Vitalist meeting already have presentation for that. So it's like interesting to keep talking.
Yeah.
It's another type of research, basically. So,
and this community you have in the Phyton, it's very good because. So thank you for inviting us anthropologists.
Yes.
Yeah, no, thank you for coming. Well, I think we can leave it here for today. There are no more questions or comments. Again, thank you very much for coming, Xavier, Ethel, and Andrés, and thank you all for joining us.
Thank
you so much.
Thanks. Bye, everybody. Thanks so much.